The heavy revolving glass door deposited me into the sparkling crystal and faint, expensive perfume scent of Le Jardin's secret restaurant. That elegant name, the Secret Garden, felt to me at this moment more like an arena disguised by a veneer of superficiality. The family's dinner table was already nearly full. The sound of lively chatter a discordant tune against my mood. I took a deep breath, trying to keep the smile on my face from appearing too forced as I walked towards them. The first glance was from Aunt Beatrice, always the vanguard in expressing concern, or rather, thinly veiled satisfaction, regarding my life. "Oh, is that you, Evelyn? You look a little thin these days, dear. Work must be very demanding, mustn't it?" Her voice boomed, loud enough for the others to hear, carrying an indescribable hint of sourness. Uncle Arthur, Aunt Beatrice's husband, merely gave a slight nod. His eyes quickly shifted to the expensive watch on his wrist, as if the time spent on me was too precious to waste. Cousin Julian, with whom I'd once played as a child, was now a smarmy young man, eyeing me from head to toe before smirking and muttering just loud enough to be heard, "Still that minimalist style, huh? Must be saving every penny." But the epicenter of the contempt always radiated from Robert and Catherine, my brother and sister-in-law. Robert, the promising heir of the family company, Morrison Enterprises, always took immense pride in his position. And Catherine, the suitable wife, was like a queen reigning from the peak of extravagance. "Evelyn, you made it?" Catherine chirped, her voice sweet but her eyes sharp as a knife. "Sit here, dear. We were just talking about our skiing trip to Switzerland last month. St. Moritz Peak is absolutely stunning. You really should try to go sometime." She emphasized "try to go sometime," as if it were a distant dream I could barely hope to reach. Robert added, with his usual patronizing air, "That's right, Evelyn. Life is short, you should enjoy it. If you keep burying yourself in that little consulting firm of yours, when will you ever get ahead?" Little consulting firm. The label they'd slapped on me for years. They had no idea that this so-called little consulting firm had expanded dramatically, becoming a silent force in the financial technology world. They only saw the surface, the part one intentionally displayed to maintain a semblance of peace, however fragile. The dinner continued with endless stories of multi-million-dollar deals. Charity auctions where they spent exorbitant amounts just to be seen, or shopping plans in Paris and Milan. Every word, every smile, every glance they directed at me felt like a reminder. "You don't belong in this world, Evelyn. You are the outsider." They spoke of investments, of connections with powerful figures. Robert was particularly animated talking about Morrison Enterprises negotiating to acquire a promising financial technology company called Innovate Solutions. He clapped James on the back, Robert's friend and now business partner at Morrison Enterprises. "Innovate Solutions is a juicy target, Evelyn," Robert said with a self-satisfied air, as if explaining to a child. "Their technology will give Morrison Enterprises a huge leap forward. Fortunately, we were quicker than other investment funds, especially that mysterious Artemis Capital Fund. Heard it's expanding rapidly, but no one knows who its owner is." I sat silently, my hand gripping the silver fork tightly. Innovate Solutions. Artemis Capital. Those two names, spoken from their mouths, made my chest feel tight. James, sitting next to Robert, nodded in agreement. "Exactly, Artemis Capital is quite a thorn. But we believe Morrison Enterprises is strong enough to handle any competitor." "Evelyn, have you ever heard of that mysterious fund?" "Probably not, I guess." He chuckled, a challenging look in his eyes. They didn't know. They didn't know that Innovate Solutions was the very first brick I laid for my career foundation. They didn't know that the mysterious Artemis Capital Fund they were wary of was founded and run by me, poor Evelyn Reed. Sitting amidst that glamour and those contemptuous words, a cold, decisive resolution formed within me. It was time. Time to pull down the velvet curtain and show them the stark truth. Time for the play they had orchestrated about my life to end. with a spectacular reversal directed by me alone. I don't remember saying goodbye properly. The final moments at that table were a blur of forced smiles and empty pleasantries. All I recall is the cool night air hitting my face as I stepped back out onto the street, the stark contrast between the opulent interior I'd left behind and the quiet reality of the city outside. Getting into my modest car felt like shedding a costume that had grown heavy and suffocating throughout the evening. As I drove, the words of my family replayed in my mind like a broken record. Little consulting firm. When will you ever get ahead? Poor Evelyn. Each phrase was a brick in the wall of their perception, a wall built to keep me in a box labeled insignificant. But sitting in that car, the engine a familiar hum beneath me, I felt anything but insignificant. I felt a quiet power, a simmering resolve. The hurt was still there, a dull ache. But it was now overshadowed by something sharper, determination. They saw a caterpillar, unaware it had already become a butterfly, soaring at altitudes they couldn't even imagine. They were so blinded by their own perceived status, their own narrow definition of success, that they couldn't see the reality unfolding right in front of them. And their arrogance, their blatant disregard for my feelings, had just pushed me over the edge. The time for quiet observation was over. It was time for action. Driving home, I didn't turn on the radio. The silence was filled with the whirring of my own thoughts, connecting the dots, finalizing the plan that had been a vague possibility but now felt like an absolute necessity. James mentioning Innovate Solutions and Artemis Capital wasn't just an insult, it was a strategic error. They had inadvertently revealed the target of their ambition, a target I already controlled. The next morning, the city felt different. Brighter. Sharper. I went not to the small office they pictured, but to the sleek, imposing skyscraper that housed Artemis Capital. As I walked through the hushed, efficient corridors, past the sharp, focused faces of my team, the contrast with the previous night was almost surreal. Here, I wasn't poor Evelyn. Here, I was Ms. Reed, the founder, the leader, the one whose decisions shaped markets and influenced global finance. My first call was to my chief legal counsel. Brenda, I said, my voice calm and steady. Initiate the process to immediately terminate all preliminary discussions and potential agreements between Innovate Solutions and Morrison Enterprises. Effective immediately. Brenda, ever professional, didn't ask for details. Understood, Ms. Reed. I'll get the paperwork drafted and sent out within the hour. Next, I called my head of M&A David, I began. I want you to accelerate the contingency plan for the full acquisition of Morrison Enterprises. Prepare the final offer and have the team ready for a hostile takeover if necessary. I want this ready to go by end of day. There was a brief pause on the other end. David knew the plan for a potential acquisition had been in the works as a just-in-case scenario. Given Morrison's aging structure and potential vulnerabilities. But accelerating it this rapidly was unexpected. Morrison Enterprises? Are you certain, Ms. Reed? That's a significant move. I'm certain, David. They just made it personal. My voice was quiet, but the finality in it was unmistakable. While my team moved with the swift, silent efficiency of a well-oiled machine. I took a moment to look out the panoramic window of my office. The city stretched out beneath me, a complex web of streets and buildings. From this vantage point, it was easy to see how small one particular family's world could be, confined within the walls of their own arrogance. I spent the day reviewing financial reports, strategizing with my core team, tying up loose ends. The air in the Artemis Capital offices was thick with focused energy. No one needed to be told the significance of what we were doing. This wasn't just another deal. It felt different. It felt like justice. News travels fast in the financial world. Especially when a promising acquisition target like Innovate Solutions suddenly cuts ties with a major player like Morrison Enterprises. I knew it wouldn't be long before the news reached my family. Before Robert and James started asking questions. Before their carefully constructed world began to show cracks. I pictured the moment they would find out. The confusion, the frustration. The dawning realization that something was terribly wrong. They would call, of course. They would demand answers. And this time I wouldn't be the poor Evelyn fumbling for excuses. I would be Evelyn Reed, the architect of their comeuppance. The quiet before the storm was almost over. The pieces were in place. The trap was set. And I was ready to watch the storm break. The phone call started the next morning. First, a frantic message from Catherine, laced with thinly veiled panic behind a facade of casual inquiry. Evelyn, dear. Have you heard anything about that Innovate Solutions deal? Robert seems a bit stressed, something about the negotiations falling through unexpectedly. Any insights from your network? Her voice dripped with false sweetness, trying to pry information while still maintaining her air of superiority. Then came Robert's call, blunt and demanding. Evelyn. What do you know about Innovate Solutions suddenly backing out? Our contact there said they received a termination notice from some. Artemis Capital? Do you know who's behind that fund? Are they interfering? He didn't ask if I knew, he assumed that if I did, it would be through some peripheral connection, some minor industry gossip I might have picked up. I didn't answer their calls immediately. I let them stew in their confusion for a few hours, imagining their growing unease. The frantic energy as they tried to understand how their carefully laid plans for acquiring Innovate Solutions had unraveled so abruptly, and at the hands of an unknown entity. It was a small, perhaps petty, satisfaction, but after years of their casual cruelty, I allowed myself this moment. When I finally decided to respond, I didn't call them back. Instead, I sent a simple, carefully worded email to Robert, Catherine, Aunt Beatrice, Uncle Arthur, and Julian, the core group from the dinner. The subject line was plain, regarding Innovate Solutions. The body of the email was concise. Dear family. I understand you are concerned about the recent developments regarding Innovate Solutions and Morrison Enterprises. Please be advised that as the owner of Artemis Capital, the entity that holds a controlling stake in Innovate Solutions, the decision was made to cease all further negotiations with Morrison Enterprises. This decision was strategic and final. Sincerely, Evelyn Reed. I hit send and leaned back in my chair. A profound sense of calm washing over me. There was no drama in the email, no lengthy explanations or emotional accusations. Just the facts. Delivered with the quiet authority I wielded in my professional life. I didn't need fireworks, the truth itself was explosive enough. The silence that followed was deafening. For perhaps an hour, my phone remained quiet. I could almost picture them receiving the email, reading it, rereading it. Their minds struggling to process the information that contradicted everything they believed about me. Evelyn Reed, owner of Artemis Capital. The mysterious fund they were wary of. The fund that had just derailed Robert's major acquisition. Then, the storm broke. My phone began to ring incessantly. Robert, Catherine, Aunt Beatrice. Even Julian, their names flashing on the screen in rapid succession. I ignored them all. The time for private explanations was over. The reveal needed to be public, or at least, witnessed. I sent another email, this time a short invitation. Please join me for coffee tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. at my office. Artemis Capital, insert address of your building. Sending them to my office felt crucial. It wasn't just a location, it was a statement. It was bringing them into my world, on my terms. It was pulling back the final curtain. The next morning, they arrived looking visibly shaken and bewildered. Gone were the confident smiles, the expensive perfumes, the airs of superiority. They looked like fish out of water, uncomfortable in the sleek, modern lobby of the Artemis Capital building. My assistant, a picture of calm efficiency, escorted them to a meeting room. When I walked in, dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, I could feel their eyes on me, searching for the poor Evelyn they knew. But she wasn't there anymore. I took my seat at the head of the polished conference table, facing them. Robert looked furious. Catherine looked pale, Aunt Beatrice looked utterly bewildered, Uncle Arthur seemed simply annoyed, and Julian looked like a confused child. "Evelyn, what is this?" Robert demanded. His voice strained. "What is this joke? You? Artemis Capital?" I met his gaze, my expression calm. "It's not a joke, Robert. As my email stated, I am the owner of Artemis Capital. And Artemis Capital controls Innovate Solutions. That's why your deal fell through." The silence that followed was thick, heavy with disbelief. Catherine stammered, but that's impossible. You have a little consulting firm. You drive that car." I allowed myself a small, sad smile. That little consulting firm was the beginning. It grew. And yes, I choose to drive that car. Appearances can be deceiving, Catherine. Something you and Robert seem to rely on quite heavily. Aunt Beatrice finally found her voice, a shaky whisper. "But, how? When did this happen? Why didn't you tell us?" "It happened over many years, Aunt Beatrice. Through hard work, calculated risks, and a lot of determination," I replied, my voice gentle but firm. "As for why I didn't tell you, perhaps because I was comfortable with you underestimating me. It allowed me to build something quietly, away from judgment and interference. And perhaps because every time I was made to feel less than, it fueled my resolve." I looked at each of their faces, seeing the shock slowly morphing into something else, a dawning, horrifying realization of the implications. The poor Evelyn they had mocked and dismissed was not just successful, she was powerful. More powerful than Morrison Enterprises. More powerful than all of them combined. The power dynamics in the room had shifted so dramatically, it was almost comical. They were no longer the condescending relatives, they were supplicants. Bewildered and vulnerable. The silence stretched, thick with their unspoken shock. Robert finally broke it, his voice a low growl. You did this? You sabotaged the Innovate deal?" "I didn't sabotage anything, Robert," I replied calmly. "Artemis Capital simply chose not to proceed with the acquisition from Morrison Enterprises. As the owner of both, that was my decision." Catherine's eyes widened, her perfectly made-up face now pale and strained. "Owner of both? You mean, you owned Innovate Solutions too?" I nodded. Innovate Solutions was the first company I built. Before Artemis Capital. Julian, who had been silent and wide-eyed, finally piped up, but how? We thought you were just doing freelance work or something." Aunt Beatrice looked like she might faint. "All these years, we had no idea." "Exactly," I said softly, the word hanging in the air. "You had no idea. Because you never bothered to look past the surface you expected to see." Robert, however, quickly moved from shock to anger. "This is unacceptable, Evelyn. Morrison Enterprises is family. You can't just interfere like this. This deal was crucial." "Crucial for whom, Robert?" I countered, my voice gaining a steely edge. "Crucial for your bonus? Crucial for maintaining the illusion of competence at Morrison's?" I paused, letting my gaze sweep over James, who was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Speaking of Morrison Enterprises, James. Perhaps you'd like to explain those discrepancies in the Q3 financials? The ones your internal auditors seem to have overlooked?" James visibly blanched. Robert whirled around to stare at his partner, his anger momentarily forgotten in the face of sudden dread. "Discrepancies? What is she talking about, James?" I didn't wait for James to fumble for an answer. Artemis Capital conducted thorough due diligence on Morrison Enterprises as part of the potential acquisition analysis, I stated coolly. Our findings indicate significant irregularities in several key accounts, particularly those overseen by James. It appears funds were misallocated. James stammered, That's not true. Those were accounting errors. Errors adding up to several $1,000,000? I raised an eyebrow. That seems less like an error and more like deliberate action. Diverting company funds for personal use, perhaps? Robert looked between me and James, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. This wasn't just about a failed deal anymore. This was about potential fraud, about the reputation of the family company, about his own future as its leader. Given these findings, and the clear mismanagement demonstrated, I continued. My voice firm and decisive, Artemis Capital is initiating a process to acquire a controlling stake in Morrison Enterprises. Not as a friendly merger, but as a necessary intervention to stabilize the company and address the significant financial irregularities. Gasps around the table. An acquisition? Of Morrison Enterprises? The cornerstone of the family's wealth and status for generations? By me? You can't do that. Robert exploded, standing up. Morrison is ours. It was yours, Robert, I corrected him. My gaze unwavering. But mismanagement and questionable ethics have left it vulnerable. Artemis Capital has the resources and the expertise to turn it around. And unlike some, our books are transparent. James, defeated, sank back into his chair, his face in his hands. Aunt Beatrice was weeping quietly. Catherine looked like she might faint again. Uncle Arthur just stared at me, a strange mixture of fear and reluctant awe in his eyes. Julian looked utterly bewildered, the casual contempt of the previous night replaced by sheer confusion. James's resignation from Morrison Enterprises will be effective immediately, I stated, laying out the first step of the restructuring. A full investigation into the financial irregularities will be conducted. Robert, your role will be reassessed based on the findings and the needs of the company under new leadership. The silence that followed was absolute. The power had shifted completely. They were no longer the judges, dispensing casual cruelty from their ivory tower. They were the judged. Their world crumbling around them, orchestrated by the person they had so carelessly dismissed. Watching their reactions, I felt a complex mix of emotions. There was a sense of vindication, yes. A deep-seated satisfaction that the years of being underestimated had culminated in this moment of undeniable proof of my capabilities. But there was also a profound sadness. This wasn't just about business, it was about family. A family that had prioritized appearances and wealth over connection and respect. The victory felt bittersweet, a triumph born out of pain. I had shown them the truth. I had reclaimed my narrative. And I had, perhaps, irrevocably changed the future of Morrison Enterprises and the dynamics of our family forever. The reckoning was here. They left my office in stunned silence, the air thick with unspoken accusations and shattered assumptions. Robert's face was a mask of fury and humiliation. Catherine clutched his arm. Her eyes wide and tearful. Aunt Beatrice leaned heavily on Uncle Arthur, who kept casting bewildered glances back at me. Julian trailed behind them, looking utterly lost. His earlier arrogance completely evaporated. I watched them go, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation began to dissipate, leaving behind a sense of quiet finality. The performance was over. The truth was out. In the days and weeks that followed, the professional consequences unfolded swiftly. James's accounting errors were indeed exposed as systematic fraud. Faced with undeniable evidence gathered by Artemis Capital's forensic accountants, he resigned from Morrison Enterprises under a cloud of scandal and faced legal repercussions. The news sent shockwaves through the industry and the family's social circle. Robert tried to fight the acquisition. He hired lawyers, made calls, leveraged every contact he had. But Artemis Capital's offer was meticulously structured, legally sound, and backed by immense financial power. More importantly, the evidence of mismanagement and the shadow of James's fraud severely weakened his position. Within weeks, the acquisition was complete. Morrison Enterprises, the family legacy, was now a subsidiary of Artemis Capital, controlled by the poor Evelyn they had so easily dismissed. My family's reactions outside of that initial meeting were varied, though none involved genuine apology or understanding. Some maintained a frosty silence, unable to reconcile the image of the struggling relative with the reality of the powerful billionaire. Others made tentative attempts to reconnect, their voices now laced with a newfound awkward respect, clearly hoping for favors or opportunities within the restructured company. I responded politely but kept a clear professional distance. The dynamics had fundamentally changed. And the old relationships, built on a foundation of condescension and misjudgment, could not simply be picked up where they left off. Standing by the window of my office weeks later, looking out at the city lights, I reflected on the journey. The hurt of their contempt hadn't vanished entirely, perhaps it never would. But it no longer defined me. It had, in fact, been a perverse kind of fuel, pushing me to build something undeniable, something that spoke louder than their dismissive words. The old Toyota was still parked in my private garage. I kept it not out of necessity, but as a tangible reminder of where I came from, of the grit and determination forged in the shadows of their underestimation. It was a symbol of the quiet, relentless work that had happened away from their gaze, while they were preoccupied with appearances and status. My triumph wasn't in the acquisition itself, or the billions in my bank account. It was in reclaiming my own narrative, in proving my worth not to them, but to myself. It was in transforming the pain of being judged and dismissed into the power to shape my own destiny. And in doing so, fundamentally altering the landscape they thought they controlled. The secret garden, the restaurant where the final act of the play had begun, was just a building now. The true secret garden was the one I had cultivated within myself, a place of resilience, strength, and quiet confidence that had flourished despite the lack of nurturing from the very people who should have supported me. Poor Evelyn. The name still echoed sometimes, but now, it sounded hollow. A relic of a past that no longer held power over me. I was Evelyn Reed, and my story was my own. The quiet triumph was complete.